Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Talking Shit About with me, Elizabeth Whipperman, aka DJ Lizard Breath. Each month, specifically the first Friday of each month, I have a guest on to talk about something they hate, something they struggle with, maybe something they're a fan of but they have some issues with. This month, I had on one of my best friends, Rob Cave, aka the Ace of Base, to talk about his experience with schizoaffective disorder. I got a lot out of this episode. I think you will too. I was originally planning on airing this episode after March because I wasn't sure about having 2 episodes focusing on mental illness, that have some darker themes, so I wanted to split it up originally, but I think there are so many parallels between the two that it's actually really beneficial to listen to them closer together. So if you haven't listened to episode 8 with Graham Barry on obsessive compulsive disorder, I highly recommend you do. And then I also recommend you listen to all the episodes if you haven't yet. But I'm going to go ahead and let us start talking some shit.
Should we get started on this podcast?
Yeah, dude, let's do it.
Let's do it.
All
Cool.
right. So, I am here today with Missoula's Ace of Base, Kung Fu connoisseur, Rob Cave. Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm sitting at my trailer, my headphones on, my cat's staring at me awkwardly, and it's been a solid day. The sun's out, no complaints.
How's Kia doing?
Kia is doing good. She's known for her sharp wit and her cut through sass, but she's been pretty chill lately. She was she was an indoor cat only for a long time because she ran away a couple times for like, 3, 5 days at a time. But I've been letting her out pretty much as she wants to go out. And now she's I'm too cold, back in the house in 5 minutes kind of cat. But it's like, it's definitely chilled her out. Like you can tell she's a lot more like friendly and chill and social and loves getting pet more, which is good. So
Oh, I miss
yeah.
her.
Yeah, and then you drew her you immortalized her on a t-shirt for Rob Travolta too.
Yeah.
She looks
Speaking.
you captured her so well. Like I look at her, I'm like, that is Kia, like to the T. Like
Oh,
he has that
thank you.
little pooch and like you got the little like pouch pooch thing like perfectly, and I was like that I feel like you like drew Kia from memory, and I'm like, I'm impressed. This is good. But
I
yeah.
definitely used a reference, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, all loves the girl. She's so sassy.
She's super
Uh,
sassy.
Speaking of Rob Travolta, why don't you give us a little background about yourself before we dig into like the real personal shit?
Well, so I'm a musician. I'm a bass player, and I've played in a bunch of local projects throughout the last 10 years living in Missoula. I'm like, after year 10, you can finally say you're a local here. It's pretty great. I've been like, I'm a local. I'm from here. This is awesome. But yeah, basically I'm a bass player, and I've been in a handful of projects since about 2012. And one of my most recent projects is Rob Travolta, which is a band that I write all the music for on a bass guitar. So I'm like basically writing all these songs and composing the arrangements, and I have a drummer that plays with me. And on the last record, I had a handful of people who collaborated with me. Like I had like Jenny Long on trumpet, Brian Tremper on synth, and Aaron Jennings on lap steel. I had Justin Decker play the harp. It was an awesome project, but it's kind of my first like project where I am like the like bad bitch in charge, I guess is what I want to say. Like everything goes by me. I get to approve everything. I get to book the shows, and it's been super validating that it's been going over as smoothly as it is, because I think I've it's safe to say I've like gave a lot of my life to music over the last 10 years and have learned so much. So it's nice to put everything I've learned in all these projects to practice. And Rob Travolta is great.
Let's go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and ask, what is schizophrenia?
So schizophrenia is something I have been diagnosed with, but I wanted to clear this up. My most recent diagnosis is schizoaffective disorder, and I'm
Mhm.
going to be referring to that as SZA, which is the abbreviated version of schizoaffective. And there's not a lot of difference in the two. I think, a lot of like the professional opinion is, basically people with SCA and schizophrenia can experience a lot of the same symptoms, but I mean, I should just get this disclaimer out of the way. I am not a healthcare professional, and I do not represent everyone with schizoaffective or schizophrenia. And there's lots of limits to what I know about it. And I think that, in my opinion, schizophrenia is something that is recurring. Medication might help, medication might not help, but this is something that people live with. It affects their lives on, I guess, like every couple years is what it takes. Like if you have a schizophrenic episode every couple years on medication, you basically get that diagnosis as schizophrenic. But schizoaffective is kind of a term where they use it when they really don't know what's going on. Like it's like you've had this episode, we know you experience these symptoms, but you might not have an episode for 10, 20, 30 years, maybe the rest of your life. I feel like a lot of people with a schizoaffective disorder do have, weekly challenges sometimes, but people like me sometimes can go, I'm on year 9 where I haven't, in my opinion, experienced any of the severe symptoms of schizoaffective disorder. I'm totally burping right now, and I'm like, oh my god, this is important. I can't be burping right now, but
I couldn't
um,
tell. Don't worry.
awesome. But but yeah, schizoaffective disorder is basically an umbrella term, and honestly, I think schizophrenia is an umbrella term as well. But that's totally opinionated for sure. So
What are the symptoms?
basically, for schizophrenia and schizoaffective, there is, it's like delusional thinking and delusional thought processes are a part of it. But the main thing I think for me that I have experienced as someone with schizoaffective disorder, and I think the main thing is um basically experiencing some type of hallucinatory effect in reality. It's weird to say out loud.
Mm.
It's like one of those things where you're coming to these conclusions, maybe not in a logical way. The way I describe it is, when I'm suffering from mania or a delusional thought process, sometimes you come to this conclusion with a logical step. You have like, I think this is a reality because of these reasons. And that's kind of a normal thought process. You
Mhm.
you have evidence, you have, some kind of time frame, etc. But with schizoaffective, you're often being influenced by things that you process that, instead of going A, B, C, D, you might go A, F, X, Y, D or something. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it just doesn't really make sense how you're coming to these conclusions. For me, some of which, have been like internalized, you know what I mean? Like, but when I think about it in retrospect, I was like, man, I came to this absurd conclusion based on these random things that I observed as an individual. But those observations for me were 100% valid, and they were presented to me, subconsciously or whatever. I mean, I'm just trying to make basically, under the under the delusional kind of mania, like just trying to make sense of a lot of stimulus that doesn't make sense. So of course, whatever you're thinking is inherently probably not going to make sense, I guess. Yeah.
Is there a specific example you could give us?
Oh my God. Yeah. Like it's silly. It's silly because people always, one of the most common questions I get are like, do you remember these episodes? And I remember everyone in detail, and it's not something I like to remember, but it's something that's, it's something that, your memory doesn't go away because you have these episodes. Like I remember these episodes like they actually happened in, in like in real life. So I want to preface the story with a trigger warning that we're talking mental illness and shit gets weird. And if this makes someone queasy, just be forewarned, I guess. I think that's
Hmm.
probably appropriate. But I'll tell a funny story because a lot of the shit is really funny, to be honest.
Yeah, in hindsight, yeah.
In hindsight, it's silly. So during my second, I would say in my whole life I've had, I was diagnosed when I was 18. And and I'm 31. In that whole period of time, I think I've experienced what it is to be having an episode twice in my whole adult life. So the second time I was I had to move back to Great Falls because of this episode I had, and the episode itself lasted like months. Like it was really frustrating. And it's funny because the second time I had the illness, I'm such kind of an introspective person that I realized I was having the episode. I moved home on my own accord, and basically, like I didn't move back in with my parents. Like my folks hooked me up with an appointment, and I pretty much was like, "Hey, like, I've done so much in my life in Missoula. I'm in this band. I have a lot I'm trying to accomplish with my time." And I honestly was terrified of going back to the psych ward because it's like giving everything away to someone and trusting them to appropriately medicate you. Um, but the damage that can be done, at least for me, was so severe that I was like, hey, like the second time I was admittedly off of medication, for I was off my medication for like 7 or 8 months. And a lot of that was because of I wanted to perform well at a job, and I thought that the medication was making me drag. That's like a Cliff Notes explanation. So, anyways, I was like kind of taking care of myself, getting back on medication, and I was trying to surround myself with my friends because it's a really healthy thing to do. In my opinion. So one day me and my friend Austin were hanging out, and if you know me, you know I smoke a lot of hookah. And hookah was one of those things that was so stress relieving. So I was like smoking hookah at my appointment, and I was hanging out with Austin. It was a good time, and I noticed these two people walk by in a dog, and then they suddenly stop and they start pointing at the window. Like, in my thought process was like they're seeing us smoke a bubbly machine. They must think it's illegal, and they're probably gonna, they're making a point to let us know that they know. So, and like we weren't doing anything illegal. We were smoking tobacco out of a hookah. There's like no reason to fret. And I like get up and I'm like, do you see that? Like those people are pointing at us. And this is like one of those like this was a big moment for me as someone with schizoaffective disorder because I never knew if I could hallucinate real people. You know what I mean? Like I heard from this, previously I heard voices, I heard stuff on the radio. Like would see my computer malfunction, and it was like a hallucination. But I've never thought I could really hallucinate people. And my friend Austin was like, I guess the story isn't funny. Okay. But my friend Austin, he was such a good friend and really cared about me. He's like, dude, I do not see a dog or those two people pointing at us. Like there's no one there. There's absolutely no one there. And when he said that, they looked down and walked away. Like the hallucination, and it was just it was it it was so real. There's nothing that I could have done to distinguish that as something not happening. So yeah, it's just like it's it's honestly just kind of scary and really vulnerable, and but yeah, like that's kind of one example. And I can go into this later, kind of what mine looks like in general, I guess, too.
Yeah, man, that sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it's
Oh, fuck.
like, and it's crazy. Like, okay, I just want to say like one other example because I think this is really important to say because people kind of cast the same judgment on everyone with this diagnosis, and the more you meet people with schizoaffective disorder, none of these people have the same delusions. None of this illness manifests in the exact same way. And for me, a lot of my hallucinations were media based, TV based, radio based, basically things I could explain. I've never had like the anomalous voice in my head, but I've watched, TV shows that don't exist. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like I turn on the TV and then I'll go back and try and find these things after the fact and they just don't exist. And it's like it's so trippy because I feel like my brain won't accept like I mean this is like such a speculation, but it's just like I feel like for me it's like I'm tricked into these things by like, media stimulus essentially, but and it was trippy to see like the fake people because I was like, this is new, like this isn't something that's in my ballpark. But that was kind of a moment for me where I was like, holy crap, like this is a reality. This illness is a reality for me that I need to get 100% on top of, because after that, there was no doubting to me that I had this illness, but it was a matter of how can I preserve the best parts of myself and how can I battle this and make this part of my existence something I don't have to deal with to exist in a society. Yeah. Okay. Good endpoint.
So, what are the ways that you have found that help you feel balanced and, yeah, balanced? That's how, I don't know. That's usually the word I like to describe or like,
Yeah.
help you find your baseline.
I feel like for me a lot of it, and I'm glad you asked this question because it was something I wanted to talk about. For me it's a recipe, like people kind of assume like, if you have a mental illness, you get medication and then you're better, and I think for me it's like, yes, I take my medication daily and I know it's a critical part in helping my mind function, but there's a lot more to it. Like I feel like for me, what keeps me balanced a lot of the times is expression, music, a big part of it, accountability, having a job, having a community, and having friends. I think from my personal experience, all those things that drive me to do what I do well and be a good friend are a part of me staying, you know, grounded, and maybe empathetic even, and a lot of that accountability to my friends and to, people who believe in me, it it gives me the motivation to stay grounded. And a lot of it too is, for me, it's stress management. And that's like a huge part of it too. Your medication might help you stay grounded, but like if you're in a situation where you are so stressed out, whether it be with work, relationships, maybe there's some drama, whatever, it's not like the medication's gonna be an impenetrable fortress of sanity. You have to manage your stress, because once you kind of dig into this mental illness, you realize, oh man, like people do have breaks even if they're fully medicated, and I think the biggest thing for me is just like identifying how much is too much, and knowing not to put too much on my plate, so I can, like, have the time to stay grounded and focus on staying grounded, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of support from your family?
Oh yeah. I think for me, it's my family is something that I consider quintessential in my recovery from episodes and continued stability. It's so silly too, because like schizoaffective runs in my family, and it was honestly like not on my radar as a kid. I got this illness when I was like 18, and the entire 18 years prior, there was no preparation, there was no warning. Even though it ran in my family, I just didn't even think about it. It was so off my radar. But my family is like, they're a key part of that recipe too. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like, without my dad's support, I admittedly given me financial support after episodes, and like also just, like, it sounds silly, like I'm a 31-year-old bearded guy, but I talk on the phone with my dad every day, and I just check in with him. I'm like, yeah, like part of it's like a medication check-in, like, yeah, I took my medication today, but it's also a chance for him to vent to me and for me to vent to my dad, and get that reassurance, that sometimes people get from therapy or a friend or a family member. And it's funny because when we started doing the daily check-ins, it was always, for me to make sure, I think it was like peace of mind for both of us. But now it's to the point where he's venting to me, I'm venting to him, and it's just like this like thing where we're just bonding over the phone. And I'm really thankful for that relationship with my dad, and I'm very mindful that, it's a privilege to have such a good relationship with uh a family member like that, for sure. So
Have you found any types of therapy to be useful at all?
I think there's a couple things that I think I found pretty useful. Therapy in general, like just going to see a therapist. I saw this therapist for a while throughout my early 20s, and he kind of, this one guy is probably the best therapist I've ever met. Completely changed my life and my perspective. One thing about me is I'm, LGBTQ, I'm bi, and I have this mental illness. And yeah, like I met this therapist, and I was pretty much like came in sobbing, you know what I mean? Like rock bottom, I need therapy, like right
Mhm.
now. And then, he totally reinforced that belief in myself that I'm not a diagnosis, I'm not a sexuality. You know what I mean? I am who I am, and there's so much more to me than that part of my life experience. And so I highly, suggest it. I wish I could go to therapy now, but I'm on Medicaid, and I've had a few therapists since then, but none of them, I feel like I set the bar honestly so high with the first one that
Mhm.
it just never really did the same thing for me after that point. But one cool thing I benefited from, meditation, I think is super key, with or without any kind of mental struggles or, mental divergence. And something that's kind of neat. and I don't do this nearly as much as I used to, but I think it's called cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah, I do
Um,
that.
and that's really interesting. That's something I would really highly suggest looking into. And for me, it was kind of just to combat interpersonal negativity, and like when
Mhm.
I recognize the negative thought process, I would mindfully think about something else in such great detail. And then sometimes this is kind of brushstroking the idea, but like you like maybe focus on your favorite picture or something, and before you know it, you feel that negativity less and less. And I think that's a basic concept, but I may be completely wrong. As disclaimer, as mentioned before, I kind of know what I'm talking about.
I have done a lot of work with CBT. I can give an example.
Like,
So, for example, someone told me once in like 6th grade that I talk about myself a lot, and that haunts me every day. Like every time
aw,
I open my mouth, I'm like right now I'm like fuck, I'm talking about myself. Like this, like
yeah.
I have a guest on here. I shouldn't be talking about myself. I'll find
Imagine how
some
I feel.
excuse, you know? And I brought this up to one of my therapists, and on that note, I loved her. She was the first
Awesome.
therapist ever that I got along with. It took so much trial and error. It is so important to find a therapist that you actually like. Just because otherwise, I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like it's
that's
just
I
a
mean
waste of
that's
time.
key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she was a big fan of CBT, and she was like, "All right, we're gonna do math," which I was like, "Fuck, like no." Um,
Yeah.
and she wrote
You say math, I
it
say
out.
refunds.
um she wrote out on the board, the belief that like I talk about myself too much. And she was like, "Okay, now how many friends do you have?" And then that was like a whole like crisis of me like, who do I really count as my friends? And like
Yeah.
I came up with some number like 4. And she was like, "You
Mm,
have more than 4 friends." And I was like, "Have it." But and then it was yeah, this whole other hill I had to climb. But
uh,
eventually I climbed it, and we did a bunch of like calculations like guessing like how many times do you talk to people each day, how many people do you talk to each day, now how many people have told you that you talk about yourself a lot, and it's like, well, one. And
yep.
then she goes,
Yep.
okay, and she divides how many days, and she does the math, and then it comes out to 0.00000 like 1% of people say this about you, and it's like, okay. And it requires a lot of work. CBT is work, which I hate. Like I hate that it takes like every day I have to like kind of work at it a little bit more, but when you do, it just becomes so much more natural.
Well, I
And
feel like,
yeah.
yeah, I love that example. What were you gonna say? Sorry, I'm just like
Oh
so.
no, that's pretty much it.
I feel like it's like that's also like one of those things too, where like you're undoing internalization, which also can be combating a traumatic experience. Whether it be like bullying or just something that you've internalized that in your adult life, like one thing I always tell myself too is like, people are people and everyone has their own course, and like it's very rare to me that someone, doesn't give me the respect you would give anyone. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. And like people are usually like in their own lane, and like I don't know. I think that like it's interesting too. That's like a whole nother subject, I think, especially with like schizoaffective disorder, like and internalizing what other people think about you, like when really I think people are just trying to keep their shit together as well. Like yeah.
Yeah. And that's another part of CBT that we worked on is like I'm always like hyper aware of other people and just constantly assessing everyone as like a threat in some way or another,
Yeah.
whether it be like socially or physically. And part of CBT is like, analyzing, well, how often are you staring at strangers and then thinking about them later, and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and trying
Huh.
to, get yourself out of that. Again, it's so much work, but
Yeah, it's work. I think a lot of the times it's also it's leaning a lot on logic, you know, too, and just like I feel like it's cool because like it makes you kind of self-aware of how you observe the world. And then when you think about like your perception, like if you like let's have like a silly example. Like let's be like, oh, I'm wearing pink shoes today because they're the only shoes I have, and I'm so embarrassed because I'm wearing pink shoes and I'm a bearded man. This is me I'm talking about. And then I realized like how many people's shoes do I remember from the last 5 years of my life?
Yes.
And I'm like zero, unless I'm like those are some dope shoes, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's super silly. Yeah,
That's a great example.
it's interesting too because I've never heard that explanation for cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't know. I was kind of what I was kind of taught too. It's like thought association, but I like I said, like I could be completely wrong, but I like that a
That
lot
could
too.
also be dialectical behavioral therapy, which I've also done. I'm not
Oh,
really sure where the line is, to be
okay.
honest. I don't like acronyms. Like acronyms and numbers, my brain just kind of like starts to shut down. It's like, no.
No,
Um,
yeah.
I don't know why. Um, do you want to go into what an episode looks like, or?
I'm gonna probably do like a brushstroke of it. I do want to say, one of the things about schizoaffective that I want to talk about too, that I think is really important to understand is the metaphor I make for schizoaffective and schizophrenia is how people experience these episodes are as wide, are as varying as how diverse like people's thought processes are themselves. So in my opinion, no one's really experiencing the same thing when they have an episode. There might be overlap, there might be similar themes, but everyone has a unique way of thinking, which makes the effect of this illness on individuals individualistic, if that makes sense. So for me, the first time I had an episode, I was, 18. It wasn't on my radar. And basically, the first time I think I experienced delusion or hallucination was playing Counter Strike, to be honest. As a 18-year-old boy who loved video games, I basically, was like, on this computer, I was kind of a computer head when I was a kid. And one of the kind of scariest but really key examples of when it made sense, like, because I didn't really know what was going on. I basically like had this episode, ended up in the psych ward, was basically locked in the psych ward for 2 weeks without anyone saying this is what you're dealing with. And then I got out of the psych ward, and then I went to my first round of therapy with a social worker. Shouts to social workers, by the way. I love social workers. And then that social worker, probably 16 days after I was in the psych ward, was like, we're looking at schizophrenia. And like, when I heard that word, it was a relief. It was a huge relief to me when I first heard about it. Because I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Like, because I had all these weird anomalous things happening in my reality, and yeah, the diagnosis made so much sense to me. And I was like, I remember feeling that way when I was 18. You're so gun ho as a young person that you're just like, let's fight this. This is something I know about, and at least I have the knowledge to handle this now, which is crazy. That it took so long for someone to just give me the basic information that I deserved, probably from day one in the hospital. But that's also my opinion. So the example I was gonna give about what it kind of looked like for me, I was like playing Counter Strike, and I was super good at Counter Strike when I was manic. That's just flexing. But I started like looking through songs, and it was a Windows Media Player at the time. This was the day of the terabytes where you actually had to either buy CDs or download a vast discography of music to listen to off of a pirating site. And I started scrolling down my Windows Media Player, and it would be like, imagine like, you're scrolling through all your favorite songs, and you see 6 songs all with the same title, or 7 songs all with the same title. And that title to that song is "You're Doing It Wrong." Yeah. And then you would scroll more, and 10 songs would have the same title, maybe "Try Again" or "Give Up" or something like that. And it's freaky because, like, so I started noticing this on my computer. This is like recent technology. So my first explanation for this, because it was like insane being on the computer during this first episode, someone's hacking my computer. Like, that's what I thought. I was like, someone's hacking my computer, and it's wigging out, and it's really freaking me out. Like, I don't know who has access to this computer, like why they would be doing this, and you're just trying to run these logical circles. And like, I wasn't getting a lot of sleep. My family was super worried about what was going on. And eventually I ended up in the psych ward. And it's fun. It's not funny, but it's kind of a sad story. Like, me and my brother, we fought when we were like very little, but from like, I can't remember fighting once with my brother after I was about 10 years old, because we were just best friends. Like, we were best friends. We were always hanging out. Like, his friends were my friends were his friends, and we just got along. And the first time I ever fought with my brother was right before I went to the psych ward, and he had to just basically convince me to go to the hospital. And it was really sad. Like, and I remember that distinctly. we were outside of the this restaurant, La Pastada, home of the pastada. Um, it's and like, it was this place I'd been to 1,000 times, and he convinced me to go to the psych ward, and I think that was the only way I was gonna willingly go, to be honest. Was that if he brought me there, and he did. To be honest, I like, the reality of my illness is really scary, knowing that basically you can't trust your eyes or ears during these episodes. It's like, it's a level of vulnerability that I don't envy anyone that has to. I don't wish it on anyone. You know what I mean? But yeah,
You said you've had 2 episodes?
yeah, just two. Like, I think I had maybe three. But I had two big episodes, and I kind of got a scare in the middle of that time period. I always question if it was an episode or not. I think it was like a slight one, but it was one that was pretty manageable. And I like took time off of work and got back after a couple months. It was way less damaging than the first major one and the second major one. There was like a blip in the middle.
When you were getting those messages like doing it wrong and try again, do you think that was, and we don't have to pick this apart, but I've just been kind of like obsessed with the subconscious lately and like low key getting into metaphysics.
Yeah,
But do you think that was your brain trying to like process something that was
definitely.
going on? Yeah.
I mean, my belief, like, in everyone with schizoaffective disorder has their own explanation for all this stuff, and it's, wide ranging, but I really think it's a product of what you internalize, what you believe, and what you're facing in your life, whenever it hits. It's good to note, kind of to go back to stress management, that before, I was like, it was the end of summer, I was 18, I was going to college. It was a stressful time for me, and one of the things is like, it's kind of salty, but I feel like for me, I had the worst coming out story of anyone that I'm aware of, because like, right before I had this, I noticed this break, like, I had my first boyfriend in high school, and we broke up, and my dad, I came out to my family, and I love my dad, and he's the biggest spoiler in the world, and he's a big, he's pro LGBTQ, but it was a shock for him to know that about me. And it's silly because my mom was like, boy, I knew you're gay since you were 11. Like, and I was like, you did? Like, oh my God, you see me, mom? Like, but it was a hard time. I was like about to go to college and move away, and things were rocky with my dad, which was a huge trigger for me, to be honest. I'm not passing judgment on my dad, but like right before, like maybe a week before, like I started noticing this stuff. It like, we got in a like the first time I ever got in a physical thing with my dad, he pushed me, like into a laundry, like in the laundry room. And I just remembered, like, after that I felt like I just snapped, like, and I did, it was scary. But it's unfortunate that all that coincided with me coming out as like a bi male, because I remember coming out being so ready to handle it. And then, like, man, this is so sad. Like, um
Oh.
but like I just remember like coming out as like a bi male, like ready to take this battle on, and then I'm in the psych ward, and then I'm schizophrenic, and I was like, I can't deal with this. Like, I can't deal with all of this weight right now. Like, coming out as bi seemed so manageable, but like having all these labels, like, like bi and schizophrenic, you're just like, damn, enough is enough, like, it's
Yeah.
silly. And it's just to kind of paint a picture of like, this was what I was going through at that time, like all this, stuff, and it just was so much stress. I couldn't handle it, you know what I mean? So,
Mm. What are some misconceptions that you think people have about schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder?
oh, I have a story saved. So, I
Yeah.
think his name is Matt Lauer. Do you know who Matt Lauer is? That dude, the
Mm,
anchor. I think
mm,
some random anchor, and I saw this video of like, it was titled like a practice in empathy with schizophrenia, and basically this anchor had to do all these kind of math tests and stuff. One was without the simulated schizophrenia. Sorry, I had a funny voice to say that. So the simulated schizophrenia was him with earbuds, basically hearing voices and messages in his head at random. And I was like, no, like that is not what I've been through. And that's not what a lot of people have been through. But yet this anchor is on national television telling people what schizophrenia is, telling them to be empathetic. And for me, it's like, after you hear that, you just assume that every person you meet with schizoaffective disorder has some random person screaming in their head, and like the difference is with me, I've had all these hallucinations, the two times in my life, but I've never had that. I've never had the random voice that's just in your head no matter what. Like, there's always some kind of explanation for me. You know what I mean? So like, I couldn't relate as a schizoaffective person, yet this guy is trying to do a good thing and tell people to be empathetic while misrepresenting an entire demographic of people with unique experiences. And like, I feel like the stigmas just are just go on and on too. This is something that's kind of a two-sided coin. And I've been thinking about how, because I did want to mention this, like the level of discrimination I faced as someone who's schizoaffective in at the workplace. I basically had two jobs where I really feel like they discriminated against me. One of which I thought I did a great job at, and I basically had my episode after a season of working there. And then they offer me basically a demotion the next season. They're like, we want you to work here, but we're gonna give you the easiest job there is. After I performed really well at that job. And there was another job I had where, like I'm not gonna name these places, but I had another job basically that, it's kind of silly. There was a advocacy piece written about me, and I was like, oh my God, like I haven't told anyone about this, and there's an article that's gonna be about my mental illness coming out. So I let the owners know about it. And I was just like, advocacy is so important to me that I just want you to hear it from me instead of reading about it. This is like the shade of gray for me because they were so supportive, so proud of my advocacy, so accommodating from that point forward in a way. But I remember I like disclosed to a manager, I was like, man, like I had to overcome a lot of mental obstacles in this job because it's a demanding job, it was a job that was heavy on multitasking, heavy on face-to-face interactions. You had to memorize a bunch of stuff, and I got good at it. I went through the hard times and I got good at it. And that was like the point of that conversation. But then after that conversation, I didn't have any shifts. Like I had the one job, but I basically had 3 or 4 shifts taken away from me, after basically, thinking I could rely on this to pay all my bills. And then basically the cliff notes, I ended up leaving for an old job where I could basically pay my bills. And I'm like, I got so comfortable, as a health advocate that when they wouldn't let me cover shifts or work these same shifts, I took it so hard and I was like, man, I've been doing this for over a year and now I can't even cover a shift. It's just like insane. Like the discrimination is real, and I feel like a big part of that is that no one teaches someone how to advocate someone for a mental illness. No one teaches people that people with schizophrenia are diverse. Like if I was, like not to flex too much on myself, but like if I was going to use a couple words to describe me, I would say artistic, musician, dependable, reliable, and I would even use a word level-headed and calm, you know.
Yeah,
And
those are
like
accurate.
yeah, like and it's just like but you use all those words, and I don't think anyone with, their conception of what schizophrenia is would ever use those words to describe someone with that label. I feel like everyone with this illness like has a huge level of potential, and I also feel that like a lot, like I was talking about my recipe for stability, you know, a lot of the treatment or just like, the stigma keeps a lot of folks with SCA basically isolated. SSID requires that people make less money or not work at all. And it's like all these things that I think that I practice in my daily life, going to work 5 days a week, being accountable to bands and projects I'm in, being accountable to my friends, are things that aren't even talked about that much when treating mental illness. Yet it's so key for me. Music and expression is so key. Being able to articulate my feelings is so key. But it's just like one of those things where it's just like it's so hard to even get treatment for mental illness in this town. I feel like people are just like, take a pill and that's it. When there's so many more routes to treatment that should be explored, one of which is accountability to a community, whatever way that appears, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I'm like taking all these questions and just going on all these like rabbit hole thought process.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on?
I feel like the biggest point I want to make too in general is like there's so many levels to people, and like let people make their own impressions for themselves and let their actions and the way they treat others be let them represent themselves. It's just like don't buy into stigma. And I feel like also making like talking about mental illness, because it is taboo, in so many ways. People just don't bring it up, but I think we need to normalize like how we all deal with our struggles, whether it be with neurodivergency or not. I feel like a lot of these things encompass each other. A lot of the lessons I've learned having a mental illness are so applicable to on a universal level. And I feel like, discussing and being open-minded about, how we live with diagnosis, or how we overcome, and not ranking them either, because if like all these like things with neurodivergency affect people equally, and I think we need to normalize and not make mental illness a taboo thing anymore, because the more it goes on, I think the less healing is going to be done, and the less progress we can are going to have. You know what I mean? Yeah. I feel like this is like my most passionate subject too, so I'm sorry if I'm ranting a bunch. but
No,
like,
no, I love it.
another thing too for me is just like, don't if you know someone has like a diagnosis like SCA, like I said, like don't judge a book by that one word. Like one thing about me, is like I've been working for 9 years straight with no breaks. I have like a 9-year employment history. I have been in a lot of bands. I've went on tour. I'm super creative. There's so many levels to people, and there's so much people can accomplish with or without a diagnosis, that we need to stop using those words like schizophrenic as a definitive point about someone, because there's so many levels that totally get washed over when you romanticize stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Anyways, yeah.
Perfect.
Hmm.
Anything else?
One of the things too, is that if there's anyone listening to this that has had a serious diagnosis recently, I cannot stress enough, like having a mental, like a neurodivergent stuff happen in your life. There's so, like I said, like so much you can accomplish, and not to give up. Like, I've like had points in my life where I've had such low self-esteem and internalized that like I deserve this, and this is who I am. And it's crazy how wrong I've proved, how wrong I was, and how much potential there is to life and relationships and friends. I think that anyone dealing with anxiety, like social or otherwise, or depression or trauma, needs to give themselves grace and know that they deserve a solid life. You know what I mean? And that it's worth it, and that results are super accomplishable.
Thanks, Rob.
You're welcome.
Yay. If people want to listen to your sweet, sweet jams, how can they find them?
I am in my main project right now. I have an Instagram account for, which is rob.travolta on Instagram. Rob Travolta is also on Spotify and Bandcamp. And then also, other bands I love that I'm a part of. Check out Wilma Laverne Minor, which is a band I play in. Check out Fools. Check out Go Hibiki and Tormi are bands I've been in. Yeah, I've been in a lot of projects. But yeah, the main ones right now, my main focus right now is Rob Travolta. I would love for y'all to listen to my music and see what I do.
Yeah, I'm gonna post all of those links, all of them.
Sick.
Yeah. Oh, Sunraiser. I was like, I
Oh,
know there was
Sunraiser.
one. Yeah, I remember Sunraiser.
Sunraiser was super
S-
fun.
yeah.
Eat Strike was a good time. Trying to think. And the first band I was ever in was called Boys from Missoula, and that's
Oh
some super
yeah.
fun music. One other
Isn't
thing
there
you
like a
need,
shark or something?
Mountain Shark was one of
Mountain
them.
shark.
One of the I have actually a brand new project, and we practiced maybe like 4 times, and we don't have a name, but keep an eye out for a new project. I just started playing with these guys. Nick Hoxley, who's an old bandmate of mine from Boys, Mike Hannick from Western States and Wojciech, and Aaron Patterson. And I'm super excited. It's like kind of like a post-punk project. I'm super excited about it. And also keep your ears out for something super exciting and super surprising that I'm not gonna drop right now, but
Ooh.
there is something in the works that I think a lot of people from Missoula, that's moss to a show of mine, are gonna be very excited about. So
Ooh.
keep an ear out for news on all the music fronts, and yeah, and also thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. It was very nice. I don't know, like we're really good friends, and it's awesome to be able to talk and be open to someone I know so well. So thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and thanks for being so vulnerable. I know it's not always easy, but I know there's going to be at least one person out there that's going to like it.
Hell
I mean,
yeah.
I know it resonates with me, but it's going to really resonate with somebody at least.
Yeah, and I think it's
Um,
just one of
yeah.
those things where it's just like it needs to be talked about more, and advocacy is like one of those things to me that's kind of trumps everything I do, like I feel like mental health advocacy is like my calling, but you can't make any money being a mental health advocate. But I
Yeah,
just
nothing good in this world makes money.
yep. But yeah, but I think it's really important, and I feel like, like it's one of those things where I'm happy to share my experiences, but like I said, like I feel like, talking about mental health, is like one of those things that's important, but also like knowing that I feel like you said, like kind of I feel like I guess the last thing I want to say as far as like mental health stuff is the biggest stride I made within my schizoaffective disorder is learning how to trust myself again, and everyone deserves to trust themselves and grow and have and dream and do what work for what they want in their lives basically. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so inspirational.
I try.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
well,
man.
yeah, I'm like, and I'm stoked to talk about it too. Like it's like I said, one of those things where it's just like it's a very important subject, and I think that there's so much to learn from each other, even if you don't have a diagnosis. Like these are like all these things, it's all encompassed. I feel like a lot of the stuff that results, from like having schizoaffective, a lot of the same struggles are faced with people whether they have a mental diagnosis or not. So we need to start
Mhm.
talking about this stuff. But yeah, cool.
Mhm.
All right,
Yeah.
are we done?
Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
that's it. Such a good conversation. So, I hope you will tune in next month. I can't tell you what the topic is because I haven't decided yet at the time of this recording. But what I can tell you is in the future, we will be having some episodes on Scientology and the federal siege at Ruby Ridge. I am hoping to get an episode on cryptocurrency, but I'm forcing myself to read a book about it first. Not that that's going to help me understand it, but I'm going to do my best. I would love to do more episodes on mental illness, mental health. If you know of anybody, or if you yourself would like to be a guest, you know of anybody, an expert in their field that you just want to hear more from, please send them my way. I like to have a variety of topics. And let's see, there was something else I was going to say, but I don't remember what it is. So I hope you loved it. I loved it. Love you.